Everybody. Can't believe it's the last week, and I know we've all learned a lot of great things from this class. So here in this last video post, I wanted to share some of my own thoughts on how to um, basically uh, respond to people from other faiths, particularly Islam, and still stand for my own beliefs. And I think a good verse to keep in mind for any situation like this, where we're talking to somebody else of a different faith, a different religion, I should say, is Colossians 4, verses 5 through 6. It says, "Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." So here the Apostle Paul is saying, conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders. That would be people who are not believers, who are not Christians. And as we do that, our speech should be seasoned with grace so that we know how to respond to each and every person individually. And I think that's very true, especially for Islam, because many of the people that adhere to Islam don't necessarily adhere to everything that Islam teaches. And I think it's really sad and shameful today that many Christians, or professing Christians, I should say, would much rather lean on the conservative Republican side, so to speak, where all Muslims are violent, all Muslims should be hated, all Muslims should be kept out of the country. This type of mindset that is very demeaning towards other people. I'll be the first to say that Islam is not a great religion, and at its root it is violent, as we have learned. Yeah, I actually grew up in the largest Muslim country in the world, that is Indonesia. It has the most Muslims by population, and all my neighbors were Muslim. I would say that all my neighbors were very moral people. Committing adultery was as much of a crime as it was in our neighborhood as it would have been for the Puritans back in the earlier days of American history. So they're very moral people. They do the right thing. They're not bent on violence at all. And I would say most Indonesian Muslims are actually moderate Muslims, is the way to put that. But not all Muslims are that way. I love some quotes here from Nabil Qureshi, who wrote the book Answering Jihad. He's a former Muslim who came to faith in Christ not too long ago. Now he's with the Lord, actually. But he says that there are 1.6 billion expressions of Islam, because that is how many Muslims there are in the world, 1.6 billion. Not every Muslim practices their faith the same way or expresses their faith the same way. And many of these Muslims, their local customs have come into play. So American Muslims have often taken on the culture of America, but if they've recently emigrated, then they still have a lot of those vestigial customs from their previous culture. So we have to keep that in mind. And so I think what he says here is really pertinent. He says, "But my experience of Islam is not the only one, and it cannot define Islam. For some Muslims, violence is a part of their expression of Islam, but their experience is no more definitive than mine was, and his experience was more peaceful than anything else." So at its heart, Islam is a religion that is violent, and not peaceful, but we should respond to each person in such a way as to believing the best out of them, and also we should also be asking them questions to find out how they're expressing their beliefs in Islam. We cannot write off every Muslim person as being a jihadist. That would just be wrong, and we would also lose an audience to hear from us our faith in Jesus Christ. And Muslims actually know a fair amount about the Bible and some about Jesus Christ because he's mentioned in the Quran. And they actually mostly believe in the first 5 books of the Bible as well. We have a common ground with creation, we have a common ground with ancestry to an extent, and even the law, the Old Testament law. So you can take them through the Old Testament law to see that they're sinners before God and that doing things in their religion is not going to bring them to salvation. Or you could show them that Jesus Christ, who Muhammad talked about, is the promised Messiah from the very beginning. There are a lot of ways that you can talk to Muslims about this, and it doesn't really matter what Muslim you talk to, whether or not they're more jihadist or not. I think we should always be ready to share our faith with them, but still ask each of them individually what their beliefs are so we know how to respond to each person. That's a long post, but I hope you enjoyed that and got something out of it. Have a great Thanksgiving.